The world is a scary place. Not because of the things that go bump in the night, but because of the things that don't. The things that lurk in the shadows. The things that watch you. The things that wait. We tell ourselves stories. We try to explain the unknown. But some things are better left unexplained. Some things are better left in the dark. This is a collection of true horror stories. Stories that will keep you up at night. Stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew. Read at your own risk. The old house stood at the end of the street. It was a place that everyone in the town knew about, yet no one dared to approach. The house had a reputation that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who even thought about it. Dark and imposing, people said it was haunted. The windows, like dark eyes, seemed to follow you as you walked by. The air around it was always colder and the shadows seemed to move on their own. They whispered about a family that vanished, gone without a trace. The family had been well known in the community, and their sudden disappearance left a void that was never filled. The house was left to decay, a silent witness to whatever had happened within its walls. One night a group of teenagers decided to explore the house. They had heard the stories all their lives and were eager to prove them wrong. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they approached the house with a mix of excitement and trepidation. They were young, they were foolish. They laughed off the warnings of the older townsfolk, convinced that the tales were just that, tales. They joked and teased each other, their laughter echoing in the still night air. They didn't believe the stories. They entered the house and the door slammed shut behind them. The sound was like a gunshot reverberating through the empty rooms and sending a jolt of fear through the group. The teenagers laughed, they thought it was funny. They tried to brush off the unease that was creeping into their minds. They explored the rooms, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. But the laughter died in their throats. A cold wind seemed to sweep through the house. It was as if the house itself was breathing, exhaling a chill that cut through their bravado. The temperature plummeted. They called out, but their voices echoed in the empty halls. The sound seemed to come back to them distorted as if the house was mocking their fear. Then they heard it, a whisper, close to their ears, "Get out." The words were barely audible, but they were unmistakable. The teenagers froze, their eyes wide with terror. They realized too late that the stories were true. The house was not empty, it was waiting. The young woman lived alone in a small apartment. She had always been afraid of the dark, but she told herself it was silly. There was nothing to be afraid of. One night she woke to a strange sound. It was a soft whisper, coming from the corner of her room. She sat up in bed and listened. Her heart pounded in her chest. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "I can see you." She turned on the light, but there was nothing there. She told herself it was just a dream, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The playground was a place of joy, swings swaying in the breeze, the laughter of children. But now it was deserted. The swings were still, the laughter was gone. A young boy was walking home from school. He had to cut through the park. It was getting dark. He could hear the sound of his own footsteps. He saw the playground in the distance, and he thought he saw something else. A figure sitting on one of the swings. He stopped. He stared. The figure didn't move, but the swing was swaying, back and forth, back and... Section 5. The Unseen Guest. The old man lived alone in a rambling house. He was a recluse. He didn't like visitors. He preferred his own company. One night he was sitting in his study reading a book when he heard a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. He hesitated. He got up and went to the door. He looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. He opened the door cautiously. The hallway was empty, but he could hear the sound of footsteps, heavy footsteps, coming towards him. Section 6. The Eyes in the Painting. The young couple, Sarah and John, were always on the lookout for unique pieces to add to their collection. One day, they stumbled upon an old, dusty antique shop at the edge of town. Among the various trinkets and artifacts, a particular painting caught their eye. It was a portrait of a beautiful woman, her features delicate and captivating. But there was something undeniably strange about her eyes. They seemed almost too lifelike, as if they held secrets from another world. As they moved around the shop, they noticed that the eyes in the painting seemed to follow them, no matter where they stood. It was both mesmerizing and unsettling. Despite their initial unease, they decided to purchase the painting and hung it in their living room, thinking it would be a conversation starter for guests. However, as days turned into weeks, Sarah and John couldn't shake off the feeling that they were constantly being watched. The eyes of the woman in the painting seemed to bore into their souls, making them feel exposed and vulnerable. They tried to ignore it, convincing themselves it was just their imagination. But the sensation of being watched grew stronger with each passing day, making it impossible to relax in their own home. One night, Sarah woke up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding in her chest. She had the eerie feeling that someone was in the room with them. She lay still, her eyes scanning the darkness, and the sensation of being watched became overwhelming. It was as if the eyes from the painting had come to life, and were now fixated on her. Terrified, she turned to wake her husband John, her voice trembling as she called his name. But before she could utter a word, she saw it. The eyes of the woman in the painting were glowing red, casting an eerie light across the room. Sarah's scream pierced the silence of the night, echoing through the house as the sinister glow from the painting's eyes seemed to grow brighter and more menacing. Section 7. The Man with No Face. The hitchhiker stood at the side of the road. He was wearing a long coat and a hat pulled down low over his face. The young woman driving the car felt sorry for him. She pulled over to give him a ride. He got in and she asked him where he was going, but he didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and she gasped. He had no face, just smooth skin where his eyes, nose, and mouth should be. Section 8. The Haunted Mirror. The antique mirror was a thing of beauty. With its ornate frame and its dark, reflective surface, it captivated anyone who laid eyes on it. The intricate carvings on the frame told stories of a bygone era, and the glass, though tarnished, held a mysterious allure. But it had a sinister history. People said it was haunted by the spirits of those who had looked into it before. Legends spoke of the mirror trapping the souls of the unfortunate, their essence forever bound to its reflective surface. It was said that those who gazed too long would see more than just their own reflection. The young woman who bought the mirror didn't believe the stories. She thought it was just superstition. To her, it was a beautiful antique, a piece of history to adorn her home. She admired its craftsmanship and the way it seemed to hold a piece of the past within its frame. But she soon changed her mind. She started to see things in the mirror. At first it was subtle, a fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement that she dismissed as a trick of the light. But as days turned into weeks, the visions became more frequent and harder to ignore. Things that weren't really there. She saw shadowy figures. They seemed to move just out of sight, lurking in the periphery of her vision. Sometimes, she could almost make out faces, twisted in silent screams or staring back at her with hollow eyes, and she heard whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing louder and more insistent. They spoke in hushed tones, words she couldn't quite understand but felt deep in her bones. One night she woke up in the middle of the night. The room was cold, and the air felt heavy with an unseen presence, and she saw a figure standing over her. It was looking at her, from the mirror. Its eyes were dark voids, and its presence filled her with a paralyzing fear. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. All she could do was stare back, trapped in the gaze of the haunted mirror. Section 9. The Hitchhiker. The two friends were driving home from a party. It was late, and they were tired. They decided to take a shortcut, through a dark and deserted stretch of road. They were in the middle of nowhere, when they saw a figure standing in the road. It was a young woman. She looked like she needed help. They pulled over, and the woman got in the back seat. She didn't say anything, but she kept staring straight ahead. They glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and they saw that her eyes were completely black. Section 10. The knock at the door. The family was asleep in their beds when they were awakened by a knock at the door. The father went downstairs to see who it was. He looked through the peephole, but he didn't recognize the man standing outside. He opened the door cautiously, and the man asked if he could use the phone. His car had broken down, he said. The father hesitated. It was late, and the man looked suspicious, but he didn't want to turn him away. Section 11. Never turn off the lights. These are just a few of the stories. The stories that keep us up at night. The stories that make us afraid of the dark. The stories that remind us that we are not alone. We live in a world where the impossible is possible, where the unknown lurks around every corner, where the things that go bump in the night are real. Never turn off the lights. You never know what might be hiding in the shadows.